It's not only through stellar legal advocacy that K.N. Choksy President's Council left an indelible mark on the legal profession in Sri Lanka, but he also did so by nurturing all the legal luminaries that followed in his footsteps. And we will now hear from one of them. Mr. Nihal Fernando, President's Counsel, served his apprenticeship in the chambers of Mr. Choksy and went on to serve as a junior counsel in that chamber for 7 years after being called to the bar in the year 1982. I now welcome Mr. Nihal Fernando, President's Counsel, to the podium.
Honorable religious leaders, Mahasangha, Reverend Shah from the Zoroastrian Church, Honorable Attorney General, His Lordship of the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, present and past, I can see district courts, high courts, district courts, and all. There are politicians, Honorable Leader of Opposition, Mr. G.L. Piris, Professor G.L. Piris, and Namal Rajpaksha and Bandulu Gunwadana. I know Mr. Bandulu Gunwadana quite well before I start. I won't say that because when my senior became Minister of Finance, he was the Deputy Minister of Finance. And I used to communicate between the two. Because sometimes Mr. Choksy didn't understand what he was saying and he didn't understand what Mr. Choksy was saying. Anyway, to get to the point. Then the President's Council, attorneys at law, the Choksy family, whom I preserve to quite a lot. Because when you are a junior counsel to a senior, you're part of the family. You're part of the family. Basically, when I select a junior, they become part of the family. So I know Mr. Choksy, Sirini, and all others. To start with, I must say, I was most fortunate to have commenced my legal career under the privilege of late Mr. K.N. Choksy PC. It is both an honor and privilege to address you all today on the occasion of this book launch. And I'm indeed humbled and have been gifted with this opportunity to speak a few words about him. At this stage, I must tell you how I got involved with Mr. Choksy. I was at law college, and when I used to go and watch him argue cases. And at that time, the leader of the bar at that time was Mr. Choksy, Mr. W. Javardhana, H.L. De Silva, Nimal Senanayaka, Mr. Ranganathan, K. Shamogalingam, Mr. Pulanayagam, who are from the Attorney General's Department. So I wanted to, he was so clear, precise in his submissions. I wanted to work with this man somehow. So I told my aunt, who was at that time the senior partner of Julius and Christie, Mrs. Lina Fernando, I would like to work with him. She just took a call and said, Cassie, I want this boy in your chambers. And so that was the beginning. I went and met him after I passed out in 1981 in January. And I started apprenticing with him. And I took oaths in September 1982. Worked with him full time, almost for 7 years, till he moved into the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal to do work. Mr. Choksy led an exemplary life. As a boy, he was the head prefect of St. Thomas's Prep School College and a prefect of St. Thomas's Mount Lavinia, and he excelled in sports from an early age. But this was only the beginning of the greatness that was to follow. Mr. Choksy was called to the bar in the year 1958, which incidentally is 1 year before I was born. Interestingly, he was called to the inner bar in the year 1981, which was also the year in which I passed out as a lawyer, as I mentioned before. As everyone in here is aware, his legal career speaks for itself, requiring no special mention by myself or anyone else. One needs only to peruse the pages of the law reports of Sri Lanka in proof of his vast practice and his integral contribution towards shaping, molding, and fine-tuning the law as is practiced in courts today. Mr. Choksy was an advocate par excellence And his use of language as a tool, communication, was uniquely owned by not just his professionalism, but also his integrity. To those who know him, you would know that he never uttered a bad word about anyone and chose to remain silent rather than say anything negative about a person. And he has told me several times, for God's sake, don't fight with judges, opposing counsel. Whatever they say, however annoying things that they say, and whatever happens, just smile and go on, and you'll benefit. And I know at certain instances, he allows the opposing counsel to make submissions, and ultimately that annoys the judges. So these are little things that we learn, and I'll never forget these things. As a senior, he stood by his juniors. Irrespective of the circumstances, he would never let his juniors down. I made big mistakes in drafting, and those days, not much computers and typewriters. He used to get a pencil about this much and then correct everything. He told me never release a draft to the instructing attorneys without reading it 3 times. So that I do even now. I recall vividly his instructions regarding being truthful and honest to court. He would repeatedly tell us, don't lie to court. If you utter an untruth to the court, then you will not be believed next time when you tell the truth. You must get into a situation where when you get up in court, the judges believe you. This is something that has stayed in my mind and something that I sought to inculcate in my juniors. Because he lived his life by the principles of vincit veritas, meaning the truth will win, and would not compromise his integrity to win an argument. Mr. Choksy was a man of his word. I remember that my oaths party, my father, who knew him, when I asked him, Mr. Choksy, how is my son doing? He said, Mr. Fernando, don't worry about him. I will give him the required knowledge, the experience, and the contacts. And that is exactly what he did. Most of the clients that I represent, big clients, multinational companies, are his clients. And once you get into that, this line flows. So I'm ever grateful to him for that. I stand here in this position today because of him. He would unreservedly teach his juniors, starting with how to do research. And his research began from the very beginning at the time of the Royal Charter. And we are trained to explore and find every case for and against, from the Royal Charter to the day of the document. And we have done work till about 3-4 in the morning. I must say, when I did the case for Mr. R. Premadasa, defamation case, I did so much of research about interrogatories. I still have that book. It's like a booklet. So much of research I did. And it was very helpful. So at this stage, I want to inform you how he got into politics. Honorable G.L. Pieris mentioned about him, how he became a minister. So I was the most junior at that time, and I used to come there and I was sort of the gatekeeper. As you know, in any lawyer's chambers, the most junior person stands near the gate and the door, and then consultations are people coming. Mr. Premadasa used to come and sit outside the veranda and wait, sometimes 15 minutes, because at that time we had so much of work. Even to smile with him, we had to wait about 15 minutes. So I used to take him in and then get him. And after some time, when I went there, I noticed Mr. R. Premadasa, Honorable Premadasa, was sitting inside the sitting room. Then, somehow, President Premadasa knew his capacity and his intelligence, and he somehow got him in. And that's how he became a minister. And even that, he insisted that he was not going to get into any other areas. So they gave him the Ministry of Constitutional Affairs. And that was the first time in Sri Lanka a minister was appointed to look into the constitutional affairs. He was the first minister. Frankly, I didn't like him doing politics. I don't do politics. But Auntie Freeney, I think, and Mr. Choksy said, Parsi community, he must have a minister. And he did. Subsequently, he became a minister of finance. And I know for a fact that he cleaned up the finance ministry totally with all corruption, whatever that they had there, and put systems in place there. I was in his chambers once. I went to see him in his ministry once. I noticed that he was in a bad mood with this piece of paper. I asked him, "Sir, what's the problem?" He said, "Nihal, I don't want to mention names. Person has given this, asking approval for these expenses that he has incurred. This to it into the basket. That's it. That person never asked for anything else after that." So the research that he did and the case law that he created, I think we all know that those principles that he developed and instilled in people and the law that he created is so helpful today to all the parties. He never appeared in court without being well prepared on the facts as well as the law. And if he was unprepared, he would honestly tell the courts, "My lords, I'm sick, or I couldn't get ready last night," and ask for a date. Never try to avoid the benches. In the year 2004, when I took oath as the President's Council, I was one or two of Mr. Choksy's juniors. I was conferred silk on that day. The other being the Harsha Souza President's Council. And that was the day that it was a very happy day that Mr. Choksy, because that day was extremely proud. He was extremely proud of the fact that two of his juniors became President's Council, took silks on that day. And we still have the photographs that we took with Mr. Souza. He's here today. Mr. Choksy was not just a lawyer, but also a statesman. And he served first as Minister of Constitutional Affairs and State Affairs, and thereafter Minister of Finance. He was a wonderful husband, a dedicated father, and an exemplary senior. And more than anything, a wonderful human being. His legacy continues in his three sons, Jamshid, the eldest son, a distinguished professor in the University of Indianapolis in the USA. Khurshid, who is with the US Chamber of Commerce and Vista, as you know, is here, third generation lawyer. And the day he took oath, Vista took oath, if your father and mother was alive, it would have been the happiest day for us. And he's a third generation. Mr. Choksy and his wife, Freeney, have been with us today. He would have been, I'm really sad that I think of him. I'm thrilled that Mr. Udita Devapriya, he interviewed me, has chosen to give longevity to the life of Mr. Choksy by commemorating his life and times with the writing of this book. I have had the privilege of reading part of the book because it came out of the printers only 1-2 days back. And I think he has done a wonderful job. He has captured the essence and vitality and encapsulated the man who was a remarkable gentleman and my cherished senior. In a society governed by laws, the concept of respect for legal system is paramount. The words of Louis T. Brandeis, a distinguished jurist and former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, said powerfully, I quote, "If we desire respect for the law, we must first make the law respectable." This is what Mr. Choksy unwittingly and uncompromisingly did in his entire life. His rise to prominence in the legal fraternity was proof that a lawyer must never and has no need to ever compromise his honesty and integrity in respect of the law. It is fitting that an honorable gentleman who honored his craft by mastery of language and words is now immortalized in the same way. This book will serve as a reminder to many future generations of lawyers that in a world that is often egoistic and competitive, the legacy of a gentleman is unparalleled. What he gave to his family, to his juniors, and to the legal fraternity, the legal history of this country, cannot be contained in the pages of a book. But to those who know and knew Mr. Choksy, you will undoubtedly know that his legacy was who he was and the life he lived in the service to others.